Vikings were a massively misunderstood culture. Known at the time as the Norse, Norsemen and Danes, they were notorious for their raids and prowess in battle. However, there's always been more to what constitutes this complex society than just that. Vikings have often been historically recorded by those who opposed them rather than by themselves, which certainly doesn't help them from the perspective of history and getting to the bottom of who these people actually were. However, here are some fun Viking facts, at least to a degree that we know, to keep you entertained for a little bit. I decided to initially compile 10, but that number soon became 20. Why? I guess it just did. What is a Viking? That's a key question to answer before delving into anything. To simplify the definition, the Viking Age was a period of time in which people originally hailing from Scandinavia and the North Atlantic would venture out into the wider world, raiding, trading and settling in new lands. Primarily in Europe, they left a distinguished mark on the ways of life and cultures of the lands they'd visited for years to come. Whilst who is referred to as Vikings were part of a broader society referred to as Danes, Norsemen and Norse at the time, Vikinger at the time was a word meaning pirate or raider, and therefore most would not qualify for the name Viking, although retroactively by historians it appears to be applied to entire blanket groups of people. Basically, it's a modern name. We'll use this iconic name for simplicity's sake where appropriate, but that's not to downplay the nuance of it, and hopefully this video will maintain an effort to keep what's known as a Viking distinct from those who would not qualify for the actual definition, whilst also liberally utilising the word for the sake of keeping it clear as to what I'm on about in the first place. Anyway, with all that said, please enjoy 20 fascinating facts about Vikings. Firstly, Vikings had excellent hygiene. While you may think of them as bloodthirsty killers who bathed only in the blood of their foes and smelling awful, excavations at Viking sites have revealed the use of tweezers, razors, combs and ear cleaners made from animal bones and antlers. This would suggest they commonly had hygienic routines ranging from shaving, combing their hair and beards and cleaning their ears. Evidence also suggests your average Viking would bathe at least once a week, which by today's standards may not seem like much, but compared to other communities of the time, this was remarkably clean. The next fact is about blonde hair. Viking men preferred to be fairer haired, even going as far as bleaching their hair with a high lye content soap to lighten their hair and in some cases even their beard. It's believed this dyeing method also dealt with head lice. Number 3. We already know this, but Vikings did not refer to themselves as Viking. In fact, the word wasn't used like that at all, being utilised in the 19th century onwards to refer to what at the time were known as Norse, Norsemen and Danes. The word Viking is believed to derive from a verb in Old Norse that meant the act of seaborne raiding or adventuring. So those who would participate in these raids, trade routes and adventures would be going Viking rather than being Viking. It's a cool one that's more rooted in linguistic semantics, but that's always going to happen. Fact number 4. Vikings used stealth. Vikings utilised stealth to catch their foes off guard, using a quiet approach to get the drop on their targeted settlement, allowing them the best chance of minimising their casualties when open conflict began. They would also make land at first light when they suspected their target village would either still be asleep or in the process of awakening, and move quietly as a unit to maximise their initial impact. Whilst individually they weren't a stealthy bunch, they weren't above utilising it as a tactic. Fact number 5. The Vikings were the first Europeans to set foot in North America. Around the year 1000 CE, Viking explorer Leif Erikson sailed to a part of modern-day Canada, which he referred to as Vinland. In Newfoundland, you can find the only known site to be established by Vikings in North America, making it the earliest evidence of European settlers on the continent. This was a good 400 to 500 years before explorer Christopher Columbus would rediscover the New World of the Americas, even if he barely set foot in North America, but that's a topic for a different video. That's not to say they stuck around. They abandoned their settlement probably about 10 years after they'd landed. Fact number 6 is probably one that you're quite familiar with. Viking helmets did not have horns. Only a handful of relatively complete Viking helmets have ever been discovered, and they don't sport horns. In fact, the rarity of Viking helmets would suggest that either most of them were made of simple leathers, or that many Vikings simply would opt not to wear helmets at all. The iconic but commonly known to be myth of horned helmet Vikings was created in the 19th century. Fact number 7 is an interesting one about Viking first aid. If a man was wounded in battle, they would determine the nature of the injury by feeding the victim a potent onion broth. If the broth could be smelled once in the victim's stomach, they would know the stomach wall had been pierced and therefore that the wound was mortal, as the man would not survive. If the soup could not be detected once in the stomach, the wound was treatable, though not a clear shot at survival. Being stabbed or axed can do a number of things that can kill you, and slashing open your stomach is only one of those. Fact number 8. Vikings loved cats. In Old Norse tradition, when a warrior and a maiden decided to get married, it was common for the bride to receive a kitten, or in some instances, several kittens, as they were considered an essential aspect of setting up a new household. Cats would also often be brought on ships to deal with rats and mice. In Old Norse mythology, the goddess Freya's chariot was even pulled by 2 cats. Shout out to cats, they're cool. Fact number 9. I mentioned this in the introduction, but Vikings are massively misunderstood and they didn't help themselves. Vikings often didn't write down their own history. What's known about them comes from the perceptions of them by their enemies rather than directly. Viking history, or Old Norse history, was internally passed down within their communities through the word of mouth rather than by writing. They did leave behind runes and runestones, however, and Old Norse sagas, but they would be often romanticised and fantastical, making them unreliable from a history standpoint. Altogether, what's known about Vikings on paper is certainly overshadowed by the perceptions of those who came up against them or came into contact with them. Fact number 10. Vikings got around. So we know Vikings travelled very far, originating in Scandinavia, who we know today as the Vikings travelled as far as North America, as we already know, and even as far as Byzantium and Baghdad. In fact, there were some instances of black Vikings, albeit quite a rare sight. Many people would willingly travel to Scandinavia, and others would be taken as slaves, or thralls, and these people would come from anywhere Vikings could travel to. Many people from other cultures would find themselves assimilated with the way of life of the Vikings or the Old Norse, be it through marriage, battle, or farming and trading. The Byzantine Empire also had the Varangian Guard, comprised of Norsemen who would function at first as mercenaries but later as the Imperial Guard. Due to being distant foreigners, they'd have no political allegiances and would therefore be reliable in suppressing revolts by factions deemed disloyal to Byzantium. So the Vikings certainly got about, and they weren't always poorly received. Fact number 11. Norse women, whilst not treated as equals, were allowed some basic rights, including being able to inherit property, request a divorce, and retain their lands in the wake of the end of a marriage. Women could own property, and whilst their marriages were typically arranged by their family, they at least had some say in the matter. Make no mistake, Viking Age society was still male-dominated, with men handling the hunting, fighting, trading and farming and politics, and women caring for the home and raising children. Norse women could be very much so an authority within their own households. In wake of becoming a widow, Viking Age women would assume their husbands' roles too, tending to the farming and trading. Whilst few records document women fighting in Viking society, several did. One such example is a Byzantine-era historian recording women fighting alongside the Varangian Guard in a battle against the Bulgarians in 971. That being said, most of what we see of women warriors in Viking society today is based more so upon literary works than historical records. But it's commonly accepted that women of this culture did enjoy some basic rights. Fact number 12. Viking longships were state of the art. At the time, Viking longships were famous for their speed, stability and manoeuvrability, and a lot of features responsible for these benefits were often adopted into other ships in other cultures later on. Longships were narrow and long, as their name would suggest of course, being able to ferry dozens of raiders and traders across oceans and along narrower rivers alike. They could make land and depart from said land with relative ease. Longships were so significant in the culture of being a Viking that when prominent Norsemen died, and the circumstances would allow for it, they would be put on a boat with their possessions, which was then set alight and pushed out to sea. Fact number 13. Vikings would use urine to start fires. Vikings would collect a fungus known as touchwood, also known as hoof fungus, from tree bark, then boil it across several days in human urine before pouring it into something similar to, but not quite felt. The sodium nitrate in the urine would allow for the material to smoulder for days on end, so Vikings could carry a fire with them, or more accurately a heat source. Definitely a strange method, and I'm sure it probably carried some interesting stenches but Bear Grylls would be proud. Fact number 14 is about the terrifying Viking berserkers. Viking berserkers were champion warriors of the age. These fellas were quite literally insane, rumoured to wear animal pelts instead of armour, fighting in a state of trans-fueled fury induced by alcohol and mushrooms. They'd work themselves up into a blind rage before going absolutely mental in battle, savaging their enemies, with little to no regard for self-preservation, making them formidable foes. Fact number 15. Vikings heavily influenced many cultures and languages of the places they visited. For example, many English words spoken today are of Old Norse origin. Anger, berserk, snort, scrawny, aloft, lump, or are all words of Old Norse origin, and the list goes on forever quite literally. Even many English place names come from the Old Norse. Anywhere the name of a town or village ends with Thorpe, B or A was likely settled by Vikings at some point, and that's where the name originated. Even days of the week may be named after Old Norse gods. For example, Thursday is Thorsday. Fascinating. Fact number 16. In a remote valley in the Alfdalen municipality in northern Dalarna, in Sweden, feel free to correct my pronunciations of anything because I'm certain I'm wrong. Due to the remoteness of the location throughout history, some of its people still speak in a dialect that preserves a lot of Old Norse. Contrary to what others may have you believe, this isn't Old Norse outright, as there's no way a language wouldn't change over a millennia. The language, known as Elfdalian, however, does maintain a number of features of Old Norse not found in other Northern Germanic languages, and utilised a runic alphabet until the 1900s. I wanted to mention this one as it is a uniquely remarkable language, or at least I'm led to believe as such, but then again all are, and it's not actually Old Norse, and that needs to be acknowledged too. Today, Elfdalian is spoken by only a few thousand people. Due to being developed in isolation, it's believed to have remained closer to Old Norse than other dialects that descended from it, and that's pretty cool too. By rule of mutual intelligibility, it's considered its own language, and native speakers also natively speak Swedish. Many in this region do not speak Elfdalian today. It's not really about Vikings, that one, but I thought I'd mention it just the same. Back on topic, fact number 17 of the day. The quality of a Viking's weapons and armour reflected social standing. Swords, for example, were rare among the Norse due to the difficulty in crafting them, though the wealthier among their ranks would indeed wield them. More often than not, however, Vikings would utilise axes and spears. In battle itself, however, swords were less commonly utilised in fighting. It's also noteworthy that in a skirmish, a Viking would typically have no qualms utilising whatever was at their immediate disposal. Fact number 18 is more a case of setting the record straight. Most Norse were farmers and traders, raising and farming animals, growing barley, rye and oats, living simple and mostly peaceful lives. Fact number 19. Skiing. Scandinavians have been using skis for thousands of years. First thought to have been adopted 6,000 years ago, throughout the Viking Age, Norsemen would use skiing as an efficient method of transport in snowy conditions, also utilising this for hunting. It's also entirely possible that they used skis recreationally, so this is what passed for fun in the snowy Viking ends. Fact number 20. Finally, we're at the end. Vikings would mostly die out to Christianity over the course of the 10th and 11th century, choosing Christianity for the trade routes that it opened for them. By the 12th century, Scandinavia itself had also undergone Christianization. Some attribute the Norman invasion of England in 1066 to the marked end to the Viking Age. So in the end, this fascinating culture was absorbed into Christianity. And whilst that is a sad thought, in its own way, this didn't happen before the Vikings well and truly left their mark. And that brings us nicely to the end of today's video, a list of facts of Viking stuff. I lost my train of thought in that sentence, didn't I? Thank you all for watching, I really hope that you've enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that fantastic stuff, that would be awesome. And with any luck, we'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until then, take care and goodbye.